It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Milsey, my hometown commander, and we are back for another episode of Milsey Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us on my quest to brew your here at Magic channel. This week, we're taking a look at all four of the holiday release Lord of the Rings Scene Box commanders that are exclusive to those scene boxes, and you can also pull them in the collector boosters that were released. So I guess they're not exclusive if you think about it that way, but they are exclusive to the holiday release product. We're going to do all four of them this week in a fairly random order, depending on what order I feel like recording them in. And of course, as usual, the deck list will be down in the description below. But I decided to start with the one I was the least excited to build because I kind of figured it was going to be the most of the nuisance of the four. The other three seemed like they had a pretty easy through line as far as what I expected from the deck. But I have to say, this one really impressed me. And we're starting with Witch King Sky Scourge, our 7-mana Rakdos commander. 5/5 Wraith Noble with flying. It says whenever you attack with one or more Wraiths, exile the top X cards of your library where X is their total power. You could play those cards on a turn, and it has Undying. So when it dies, had no +1/+1 counters, it comes back on with a +1/+1 counter. The Witch King's ability is really cool in that we can kind of take advantage from getting things maybe more access to cards in our hand. I've kind of built the deck in an odd way, and I need to put a slight warning on the deck before we start, which is that if the deck does what I want the deck to do, the Witch King becomes a lot less important to have because we're going to have so much power of Wraiths that we may potentially hurt ourselves. So I think if we're playing a slow game plan, we want to put the Witch King out, but if our rest of the deck works the way it wants to, we maybe don't necessarily want to put the Witch King out, even though it is a Wraith, and we're playing Wraith Tribal more or less, we're trying to, or Wraith Kindred, or whatever word you want to use for it. The problem is the Wraiths that we're going to take advantage of are going to get ridiculously out of hand, depending on how many of them we have. And I worry that if we slam the Witch King down automatically when we get to 7, we might run the risk of actually just exiling our deck out. But we'll talk about what I mean by that, and mainly what I'm talking about is the Nazgul themselves. But we'll talk about when we get up to creatures and start with the mana base. The Doctor Who decks help us a ton because they reprinted a lot of really great red-black lands. So that really helped us a ton in getting access to some of our red-black lands for a little bit cheaper. We're playing Barad-dûr and the new Minas Morgul Dark Fortress. The other rule I'm trying to use for all the decks this week is to use all of the cards that came in their scene box in the deck. So this one comes in tapped, adds a black, and then for 4, we can put a shadow counter on a target creature, and it says for as long as that creature has a shadow counter, it's a Wraith in addition to its other types. So we can make creatures into Wraiths, which is beneficial specifically for the Nazgul. We'll kind of talk about how much of the deck hinges on the Nazgul when we get up there. But again, just trying to take advantage, using stuff like Path of Ancestry to get access to both colors, Castle Lochthwain for a little bit of draw. Getting into the enchantments, we're going to do a slight little bit of a mass as a little bit of a sub-engine, but mainly we're trying to pick things that are going to give us a bunch of value. Call to the Ring, being able to upkeep the ring tempts us. This is kind of nice because, of course, all of our Nazgul when they come in are going to tempt us anyway, so we're almost always going to have a ring bearer running around, but this could allow us to change if we want to. But the other kind of important part of the card says whenever we choose a creature as our ring bearer, we can pay 2 life if we do draw a card. This is going to allow us to draw more cards. If we can't get Witch King out left, if we're stuck, but we were able to get a few things out, we can do that. Frosty the Wild is in here because we need some way to hit hard. I think if the game plan works the way we want to, we're going to have some pretty big Wraiths, but the problem is they're not going to be able to be they're going to just be chump blocked, right? People are going to put their 1/1s in front of it and the damage isn't going to go through. We need some way to hurt our opponents, and so I think we want probably more effects, but I think Ferocity of the Wilds helps us, and it's going to give all of our Wraiths +1/+0 and trample and allow them to hit hard towards our opponents. I kind of took a page out of my Miram Dragon list for this deck because the Nazgul specifically have a really cool ability, and I think we're gonna just have to talk about it now before we keep going. It says when Nazgul enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you, right? And then it says whenever the ring tempts you, you put a counter on each Wraith you control, and of course we can have up to 9 cards named Nazgul, and we're playing all of them. So Call to the Ring is going to allow us to put counters on all of our wraiths. But every time a Nazgul comes in, the ring tempts us again, and we put counters. But the thing is the Nazgul coming in automatically makes the ring tempt us. So every Nazgul that comes in is going to put another counter or very rapidly and parabolically increase the amount of +1/+1 counters that are put on all of our wraiths. If you think about it, if we have let's say we have two Nazguls out and we put a third Nazgul in, that third Nazgul, when the ring tempts us when it comes in, we're now seeing all three of the Nazgul triggers to put +1/+1 counters on all wraiths we control. And as you start to understand, this is going to get out of control. I think the only way to make this better is by using things like Flame Shadow Conjuring and Molten Echoes to get extra copies of these wraiths as they're coming in, so that our Nazguls can continue to pump our board. And specifically for the Nazgul themselves, Flame Shadow Conjuring is fun because we get a copy of it and it gains haste. It's going to get a ton of counters when it comes in because the ring's going to tempt us, and when the ring tempts us, it will already be on the battlefield, so it's already going to get the counters. And then we're getting extra copies of those creatures that are just going to slam into our opponents. Same thing with Molten Echoes. We're getting copies of those Nazgul that are just going to run into our opponents. And I think this is going to help us build a critical mass of these wraiths to start dealing with our opponents. Because I'm slightly worried that if we don't, I'm kind of intrigued as to how we're going to put up a fight, especially in combat. If someone's worried about a random 12/12 wraith hitting them out of nowhere, then they're probably going to be a little bit less encouraged to swing out and leave themselves wide open. Grave Pact seems like a good time, especially because we're going to be pretty low on creatures, so why not try to punish our opponents for getting rid of our creatures? And Grave Pact is one of those abilities that makes attacking even better, because if your opponent decides to block and trade, they're going to lose another creature in the process. Maybe this will help us kind of tune down our opponent's game plans a little bit, so that way they have to be careful what they choose to do. Passion Archaeologist is in here specifically for the Witch King's ability. When we're casting those things from exile, we're dealing damage to target opponent, and this is going to help us. Again, like I said, the slow games, we bring the Witch King out and start using it for benefit. But if we see a lot of Nazgul and we get a lot of go wide with our wraiths, I don't think we even want to touch the Witch King, because we're going to end up milling ourselves out. Phyrexian Reclamation, for 2 mana and 2 life, we can bring a creature from our graveyard back to our hand. This is going to help us recycle the Nazgul and some of the other wraiths that we have. This can also help us recycle some of the non-wraith creatures we have in the deck, but have great relevant abilities. Retribution of the Ancients seems like a really fun card. If our Nazgul are always going to be spreading +1/+1 counters around, we might as well use something that takes advantage of them. So Retribution of the Ancients says we can pay a black and remove X +1/+1 counters from a creature to give target creature -X/-6 on the turn. This is basically removal because it's targeted, and we can give a -6/-6 to a creature, so that's going to get around indestructible. I just think this is going to help us, and it being at instant speed helps us a ton, especially because, let's say, for example, we get this out with either Flame Shadow Conjuring or Molten Echoes, we could, before that Nazgul that's going to get exiled from either of these effects leaves the battlefield, it has a bunch of or that wraith or whatever it is, before it goes away, get the counters off of it and just hit a little creature quick, or do something to take advantage of the the +1 counters before they go away. We could play the Ozolith, and the only reason I didn't play the Ozolith in the deck, even though I think it makes a ton of sense, was just the price. I was trying to keep this deck as low to the ground as I could on price, but I honestly think, now that I think about it, the Ozolith is going to make a lot more sense, because the Nazgul are just going to start throwing the counters around. So probably that's something we need to add back in, but Rising of the Day makes a ton of sense, giving everything haste, have them start hitting harder, and then Shared Animosity, giving all of them +1/+0 for each other wraith when they attack, is just going to help us get there in combat. All right, getting into the artifacts, we're having a good mix of either mana generation or mana reduction, and then other fun things. So let's talk about the mana artifacts first. Arcane Signet, everybody loves it, and it's your auto include in most decks, especially this one where some of our cards have a little bit higher mana cost with Soul Ring. We have Bantu's Monument, which drops all black creature spells by 1, which is great because almost all of the creature spells in our deck are black. And this says whenever we cast a creature, each opponent loses life, we gain a life. It's just going to help us kind of hit our opponents for a little bit of damage over the course of the game. Commander Sphere for a little bit of mana and some draw if need be. Rakdos Signet and the Talisman, each getting us more red and black mana Rakdos Cicadas, both Talisman gets us our choice. Blade of Selves is specifically in here for the Nazgul themselves. You need to get with this on one of them, and you're going to get 2 extra Nazgul a turn, which I think is going to just get out of hand for most opponents to deal with. Now, the only caveat for Blade of Selves in this deck is we need to make sure that we put it on the Nazgul that isn't legendary. The reason that is because we can't have more than one legendary creature with the same name. So if we Blade of Selves on the legendary one, and we attack with Myriad, sure, we'll still get the triggers when they come in the ring tempts us, but we're going to have to lose them immediately. So I think we always want to make sure we're Blade of Selves, putting our Blade of Selves on one of the Nazgul that isn't legendary so we can take advantage of it mostly. Hexplate Warbreaker, a 5-mana equipment that comes in and has for Mirrodin, so we automatically get a little token and it attaches. It says it gets +2/+2, and then whenever the equipped creature attacks, if it's the first combat, we untap each attacking creature. After this phase, there's an additional combat. The additional combat will help us in the game. At the end of the day, I mean, I think that's what we need to do. We need to punish our opponents and hit hard, and our Nazgul and our Wraiths are going to get big. I think the only way we're going to close the game is by trying to find out ways to take other combats, because we will get stopped eventually. Mask of Grizzlebrand seems like a really good idea, giving that creature flying and lifelink. And when that creature dies, you may pay X life, or X is its power. If you do, we draw X cards. This is a kind of another way, a little value engine we can use. Put this on a little creature swinging in towards somebody. They can block it and kill it. That's fine with us. We just draw the cards, and it has lifelink, so it dealt that much damage. We can just pay exactly what we just gained and draw. And if not, we put this on one of our giant Wraiths or Nazgul and just gain a ton of life throughout the process of just nailing somebody with it. Mask with Nexus, turn all of our creatures into Wraiths and make more Wraiths. Just makes a ton of sense. This is going to allow us to make sure the Nazgul are putting counters on everything, especially when we see them. And we have to remember, there's probably someone who's already gone to say, but Millsy, you're talking about the Nazgul, you can only play 9 of them. But remember, 9 Nazgul is a 10th, an 11th of our deck, if you think about it, right? That means that we have a good chance of seeing multiples of them, especially if we can draw more cards. And believe me, we're trying to draw more cards. So I think we're going to have a hot chance of seeing a couple Nazgul over the course of a game. If not, we're going to try to draw a ton of cards and get more of them. So I think we have a good chance of seeing them. And of course, if we're thinking about the Nazgul in our mind, if we get an opening hand with more than one Nazgul, we're probably going to keep it, right? Nazgul Battle Mace, one of the cards from the Scene Box, says a quick creature has Menace, Death Touch, Annihilator 1, and whenever an opponent sacrifices an untoken permanent, put that card onto the battlefield under your control, and that player, unless that player loses 3 life. So Annihilator 1 means on attack declaration, your opponent has to sacrifice a permanent, and what this is doing is saying, well, if you sacrifice a non-token permanent, you either pay 3 life or I get that. The main reason I like this is, yes, it is a little expensive to get down. We did talk about the fact that we were going to play all the cards in, in the Scene Boxes no matter what. But Death Touch and Menace are important. Menace specifically is the most important because it's going to stop our opponents from chump blocking us. And then all we need to do is get a trample down, and now the Battle Mace gets even better. Swift Boots for a little bit of haste. And then Sword of Hearth and Home. So +2/+2 protection from green and white. And it says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we exile up to 1 target creature we own, search our library for a basic land, and put both back down. I'd really considered Sword of the Animist as well, just to help us out with the ramp. But what I like about Hearth and Home is, remember, we want to blink the Nazgul. They're just going to blink, come back in, tempt us again with the ring, and get us another +1/+1 counter on all of our creatures, right? So this is something we want to do. Pro green and white probably is better than I think it is. A lot of removal in our format has white in it, so that's going to stop a lot of it. But hey, pro green's pretty cool, because remember, a creature can't be blocked by a creature of that color, and white and green are probably more relevant than we think they are. What you can also do is, find some of the swords that maybe have protections from the colors that are bigger in your play groups of the decks you see on a normal basis, and that could help you get your Nazgul and your Wraiths through for more damage. In the instant style, we're playing big score, nasty end, and unexpected windfall for some draw. Big score in the windfall, you pitch a card, you draw 2 and get 2 treasures, which is going to help us ramp. And then nasty end, we sacrifice a creature, draw 2, and if the creature was legendary, then we draw 3. The thing I think we might be able to, make the deck a little bit better with, and what might help us out, is we kind of want some reliable ways. If we're going to go all in on this Wraith game plan, we might want some reliable ways to get rid of the Witch King if we cast it. Because again, I'm worried that the bigger our board state gets, the harder it's going to be on us. And Nasty End was one the way I figured, here's a cheap card you could just keep in your hand. And if you realize, oh, this is going to exile most of my deck, just Nasty End it, draw the cards, and go from there. Baleful Mastery can exile target creature or planeswalker. Again, we can destroy our own cards. No one says we can't, and it feels like a pretty Rakdos thing to do, to destroy our own things. But again, if the Witch King will help us get to the end point of getting more Nazgul out and get them accessible, but we need to get rid of it to stop ourselves from dying, I think I'm more than welcome terminating or bedeviling my own creature my own Witch King in order to make sure that we get the maximum benefit. Chaos Warp can hit any permanent. Their controller shuffles it back in, their owner shuffles it back into their library, and then reveal the top card. If it's a permanent, they get put down. But mainly this is helping us out with the fact that we'll be able to kill any creature if we want to. The Devil can hit artifacts and planeswalkers. Chaos Warp can hit anything. Feed the Swarm can hit enchantments. We only have certain things that can hit any other permanents, but we can of course hit creatures really well. And then Dark Ritual, this is here to help us if we need the Witch King in order to kind of get our wheels rolling. I think Dark Ritual will help us do that. And Delayed Blast Fireball seems like a really fun card to hit off of the Witch King if possible. When we cast it from our hand, it deals 2 to each opponent and each creature they control, but if it's cast from exile, it deals 5 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. This could be a good way to kind of clear the board and get ourselves ready for a big attack. And I think it's one of the cards that we want to see off of the Witch King if we attack and exile those cards. Getting into the sorceries, I still think we want to find a way to clear the board, and if we can't get ahead, I think Blasphemous Axe, a card that's going to do that pretty well, dealing 13 damage to each creature. Costs 1 less for each creature on the board. I very most often Blasphemous Act gets played for 1 red and just ruinates the board. A card that I absolutely love. I love this card. I've had so much fun playing this card, and this card will do the exact thing we want it to do. Is Call Forth the Tempest, 8 mana red sorcery that has double Cascade. So when you cast a spell with Cascade, you exile cards from the top of your library until you get exile a card with less mana value than it, and you may cast it. And if you don't, you put it in the rest. You may cast it otherwise, and then you put all cards that weren't cast, back on the bottom of your library. And then it says it deals damage equal to each creature your opponents control, equal to the total mana value of other spells you've cast this turn. So not Call Forth the Tempest, but everything else you've cast. So we have a good chance on the double Cascade to hitting a good amount of damage, but if not, if we cast anything before this, that counts too. And this is going to wipe a board. Very often this ended up being 10 without Call Forth the Tempest mana value for me, so it was pretty easy to just wipe the board and get that going. Disrupt Decorum. I think if we're going to be attacking and we're going to be going this route of making the Wraiths as big as we can, we need to try to avoid getting cracked back, and I think Disrupt Decorum is one of the cards that can do that. Go to all creatures you don't control. They have to try to attack someone else if possible, and this is going to give us the window to potentially, when it comes back to our turn, hit him with the Wraiths. Because if you think about it, Disrupt Decorum is going to force all of our opponent's creatures to attack unless they tap them otherwise. Sure, the new creatures they play won't be goaded, but it's going to be a lot less, and this may potentially get us in a scenario where our Wraiths can then get through for more damage. Ensnared by the Morrow, one of my favorite cards released from Doctor Who, just because it presents our opponents with a pretty bad choice. They can either exile cards from the top of their library till they get a non-land card and we can play it for free, or they exile the top 4 cards from their library and we deal damage equal to the total mana value to that player, and each opponent has to do that. This just gives them a bad choice. Do they give us something free from their library, or do they roll the dice and take the hit? Either way, it's 4 mana, and I think it's more than worth it. Faithless Looting for that little bit of draw. Feed the Swarm, like I said, destroy target creature or enchantments. This can hit enchantments, and we lose life equal to the mana value of that permanent. Isengard Unleashed. If I recall correctly, this isn't from our scene box. If I recall correctly, this is from Aragorn's, but I still like this one a lot. Damage can be prevented this turn. If a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or permanent opponent controls, it deals triple that damage for 5 mana. If we have a big board state, this is effectively an overrun, depending on how many Wraiths we have, and this could potentially end the game. You know, if one of those Wraiths sneaks through, dealing triple damage, it's going to hurt. I like this card. It seems like a ton of fun, and I have yet to cast it, but I think it could be a fun card. Mortar on the March, 5 mana. Exile a creature card from our graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it. It gains haste until end of turn, and it has Storm. To be honest, most of the time when I looked at this card, I didn't even realize it had Storm. I just read 5 mana, get a card from your graveyard, and I said, well, if a Nazgul's in our graveyard, we get another Nazgul, and that's great because it buffs our whole board, right? I mean, that's fantastic. It's exactly what we want. But having Storm actually is a pretty big deal because it means you cast it, you get a copy of it for each spell you cast before it. Yes, that would rely on us having more than one Wraith in our graveyard we want to take advantage of. But if we do, then all we need to do is cast a 1 mana spell before it casts this, and then we get 2 of them. And we can get 2 of the Nazgul back, or we can get 2 of our Wraiths back. There's an upside to it. There isn't just 5 mana, get 1. If we can plan it right, we can get a bunch of things. If somebody wipes our board and all of our Nazgul go to the graveyard, I mean, we could potentially get them back, especially with haste. Sam's Desperate Rescue, bring a creature card from your graveyard back to your hand in the ring tempts you. It is a way to bring a card back to our hand, and the ring tempts us, which is going to trigger all of our Nazgul going off. And then Twin Flame. This is a card I could see ending a game if we have the right amount of mana. It says choose any number of target creatures you control. For each of them, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it has haste. Exile those tokens beginning next end step. So 2 mana we get 1, 5 mana we get 2 total copies, 7 or 8 mana we get 3. But again, if we target the Nazgul, they all come in, tempt us, it all puts counters on everything, and now they have haste, and our opponents have to deal with them. So yes, I'm aware that I'm putting a lot of my stock into the Nazgul, but I think the Nazgul are exactly the thing that's going to help us win the game at the end of the day. They're a very tough creature to deal with. They have Death Touch, so they're going to block, kill whatever they're getting blocked by no matter what. And again, we have access to 9 of them, meaning we're going to see them every game, more or less guaranteed. So why not plan around something that we can expect to see? We're just playing 1 Planeswalker before we get into the creatures. Angrath, Captain of Chaos, mainly just because it gives all of our creatures menace. And then we can amass with it, just get a little token. But again, it's mainly there for the menace, making our creatures even harder to block. So everything in our deck is either a Wraith or cares about Witch King's ability. So Bloodline Pretender, when it comes in, we choose creature type. It's that creature type. Of course, because it's a changeling, so we're going to pick Wraiths, and it says whenever another creature of the chosen type enters the battlefield, put a counter on Bloodline Pretender. So Pretender is going to get bigger as more things come in. Canoptic Wraith from the 40k decks can't be blocked. Whenever it deals damage to a player, we can pay 3 and sack it. If we do, search a layer for 2 basic lands with the same name as a land you control and put them on the battlefield. So this is kind of a little mini myriad landscape type effect. And again, the cool part about Canoptic Wraith is it can't be blocked. So the more this gets buffed up by our Nazgul, the harder this is going to get for our opponents to deal with because it can't be blocked. Same thing with Changeling Outcast. It can be blocked and it can't block, but it comes down as a Wraith and we can make it big, and we're going to make our opponents regret that this a 1 mana creature is going to hurt them. Fell Beast of Mordor. This is our last of the cards from our scene box. Flying Devour ones. When it comes in, we can sacrifice any number of creatures, and it gets +1/+1 counter for each of those creatures. And it says when it enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of counters on it. Now, what I like about this is if we have the Maskwood Nexus out, Fell Beast of Mortar is just going to get insane, and it might even nuke someone on attack. But worst case scenario, we get rid of a couple creatures to give us a few counters, and we just start hurting people with it. But what I like the best, or the idea I like the best, is get that Maskwood Nexus down, or use that shadow counter from our our black land, or do something to make this a Wraith, and this is going to start hurting our opponents. Carter is here so that we can again try to goad all our opponents and try to get our attacks to be better. Carter says when it enters the battlefield, delete until your next turn. Creatures your opponent control attack each combat if able and attack a player other than you if able. The cool part about Carter is it's not just the creatures that are in when it comes in. If I think about that correctly, it would force even creatures with haste attack. I could be wrong on that, but either way, we're goading everything. This is another copy of that Disrupt Decorum type effect, but it staples on. Whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses life and we gain a life. So people are forced to take bad attacks that could hurt our opponents in the process. Keeper of Secrets and Nalfishni both do very similar things. Keeper of Secrets says whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, it deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to target opponent. So that's going to deal damage when we're using the Witch King effect to get the cards. And then Nalfishni says, whenever we cast a spell from exile, copy it, we choose no targets for the copy. If it's permanent, it gets haste in beginning end step, sacrifice it. So just a way to take advantage of these things that we're, casting from the Witch King's ability as we're, doing that if that's the route we choose to go. We talked about our 9 Nazgul, probably the stars of the deck, and what make the deck so expensive. But at the end of the day, I think they're the thing that's going to end up winning us the game. Ring Wraiths. When it comes in, a target creature an opponent controls gets -3/-3 until end of turn. If it's legendary, its controller loses 3 life. And when the ring tempts us, we can bring this back from our graveyard back to our hand. So if it dies somehow, we can bring it back. Otherwise, it's just a 6-mana creature, but it is a Wraith, so it's just going to get bigger over the course of the game. Sauron the Necromancer. Whenever it attacks, we can exile target creature card from your graveyard. Create a tapped and attacking token that's copied that card, except it's a 3/3 black Wraith with Menace. Beginning of the end step, exile that token unless Sauron's your ring bearer. So this allows us to get some of these creatures back if they die. And then they come back as Wraiths, which again just helps our game plan. Tarian Mauler is a shapeshifter, so it's every creature type, which makes it a Wraith. And whenever an opponent casts a spell, we put a counter on it. So it's just going to get big, and it's just going to get tough for our opponents to deal with, hopefully. And we're playing the other 2 Witch Kings. Witch King of Angmar as flying. Whenever one more creatures we control deal damage. Whenever one more creatures deal damage to you, each opponent sacrifices a creature that dealt damage to you this turn, and the ring tempts us. And we can discard a card to give it indestructible until end of turn and tap it. So going to help kind of hurt our opponents that attack us. And then Witch King, Bringer of Ruin, 6 mana, 5/3. It says whenever it attacks, defending players sacrifice a creature with the least power among creatures they control. It's just a little way to potentially get a blocker out of the way for our creatures. Let me know, what do you think of Rakdos Witch King down in the comments. This is an interesting deck, a deck that I, to be honest, I didn't think was going to be that good, but I just don't mind it. I think, and if it's me, I'd probably take out the Keeper of Secrets, the Nalfishni, and the Passion Archaeologist and just go all in on maybe adding an Embercleave or Shadow Spear. Just a way to just pump these Wraiths to absolute heaven and nuke my opponents with them. I think that would be such a fun idea for a deck. And you just use the Witch King as your way to get card advantage early game if you need it. And then you try your best to get rid of it. Because if you take one combat where you have 40 power worth of Wraiths attacking, it could end your day. Now, I will say this because all the game I've been talking about how this could hurt you, this could hurt you. You could only attack with 1 Wraith, right? It says whenever you attack with 1 or more Wraiths. So if you only attack with 1 Wraith, we're only exiling a certain amount of the library. And that's where I think the middle ground for the Witch King comes in. But again, I wanted to talk about kind of the different ways we can take the deck and not just literally only farming this ability. I think we can still reach a crux point where we go, oh, we need to just run over our opponents at this point, and the Witch King will be detrimental when we go to do that. So I think there's going to be a juggling match each game where you try to determine, how do I use the Witch King to its potential, but how do I get rid of it at some point? And so if that's the case we want to do, maybe we bring in some ways to sacrifice it, and get rid of it so that we don't have to worry about it. And that's, again, where I liked a little bit of the removal, because we can use it on our own creature if need. But let me know what you guys think of Rakdos Witch King down in the comments. I'm kind of intrigued at this build, and I'd love to know what you think of it. But I will catch you guys next time.